So if you're not already a subscriber to Ready Set Drone, please hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you'll get notified when there's new videos about FPV, camera drones, toy drones, etc. Now, if you're in the market for a high-quality camera drone that has built-in safety features and is easy to fly, both of these will do the job just fine. Let's be clear, I'm talking about the EVO 2 Pro, not the EVO 2. I'm also talking about the DJI Mavic 2 Pro. Now this video is really all about exploring how you plan to use your drone and what is the best drone that fits your needs, not anybody else's. I've picked 4 main criteria for my comparison. Criteria 1 is camera specs and image quality. Number 2, flyability. Number 3, portability. And number 4, accessories. So let's start with camera specs and image quality. For this video, all the shots that I did with the drones were shot in the highest resolution that each drone has without any ND filters or polarizing filters and with the auto exposure turned on. This video was then edited in 4K and all the 6K footage that was shot with the EVO was down converted to 4K during the editing process. I didn't apply any LUTs or do any additional color correction. All the colors you see are straight off the card. So in terms of the cameras, these two are very similar. They both have a 1-inch CMOS sensor. The EVO 2 Pro has a 29mm lens with an f2.8 to f11 and shoots stills at 54-72 by 36-48. And guess what? The Mavic 2 Pro has a 28mm lens with an f2.8 to f11 and shoots stills at 54-72 by 36-48. Pretty much the same. But for video, the EVO 2 Pro really pulls ahead of the Mavic 2 Pro. The EVO 2 Pro has a highest resolution of 6K at 54-72 by 3076 and 30 frames a second, and a max bit rate of 120 megabits per second, while the Mavic 2 Pro has a highest resolution at 4K of 3840 by 2160 at 30 frames per second and a max bit rate of 100 megabits per second. Both can do 120 frames per second in full HD for slow motion. Both have the option to use H.264 or H.265 compression, and both have 8 gigs of internal storage. To me, the biggest difference is that the EVO 2 Pro can do 4K at 60 frames per second. The Mavic 2 Pro can do 4K at 24, 25, or 30 frames per second, but not 60. It can do 2.7K at 60 frames per second, but that's not the same as 4K at 60 frames per second. So while the EVO 2 Pro does have better camera specs, how much difference can you really see? And how often do you need to shoot in 6K? These are things to ask yourself. 6K files are big and require a large, fast microSD card to capture. To me, the biggest advantage of the EVO 2 Pro is not actually the fact that it shoots in 6K or the fact that it has a slightly higher bit rate. It's the 4K at 60 frames per second, which I use all the time. I use it on my regular cameras and I use it on my drone cameras when I can. So in terms of the camera quality, camera specs, I do think that the EVO 2 Pro has a slight advantage over the Mavic 2 Pro. Now let's talk about flyability. The EVO 2 Pro has a bigger battery and longer flight time, 40 minutes in ideal conditions. Now you're not really going to reach that, but that's tested in the ideal conditions. The Mavic 2 Pro has a smaller battery and a shorter flight time of 31 minutes. Again, that's in ideal conditions, moving at a certain speed forward, not even hovering. In terms of top speed, the EVO 2 Pro can go 45 miles per hour or 72 kilometers per hour in what Autel calls ludicrous mode. The Mavic 2 Pro can go 72 kilometers per hour or 45 miles per hour in sports mode. Note, that's the same thing, 72 and 45. They're both good in the wind. They both have excellent GPS, and they're both really good with return to home, which I did a whole test on, but actually they were so close that it wasn't even really worth showing. They both have tracking. Autel calls it dynamic, DJI calls it active, dynamic track, active track. They both have intelligent flight modes. Now for the intelligent flight modes, I did find the DJI software to be a little more intuitive. For example, to make the EVO 2 Pro do an orbit, you have to fly to the center of the point that you want to orbit around, set it, and then fly out to the outside radius of the orbit, set that, and then it will go. Whereas with the Mavic 2 Pro, you just draw a box around the thing you want to orbit, and you push the button and it goes. Now in fairness, I have used DJI software a lot more than I've used Autel software, so DJI software kind of makes more sense to me. If you haven't used either, you may not have the same opinion, but in my opinion, the DJI software makes a little more sense. Now, both drones have omnidirectional obstacle avoidance. It means they can stop from hitting stuff in all directions. But if you have them both set to default settings, the EVO 2 Pro obstacle avoidance is very sensitive. It works great, but it starts slowing you down anytime it gets anywhere near an obstacle, which for me messes up my flow, and especially if I'm trying to get a video shot. I found a lot of times I had to turn the obstacle avoidance off on the EVO 2 Pro so I could actually fly smoothly through things that I wanted to fly through. With the Mavic 2 Pro, the obstacle avoidance just seems a little bit more finely tuned and effective, but not quite as oppressive as it is on the EVO 2 Pro. They both work great, but I wish the EVO 2 Pro wasn't quite as aggressive with its obstacle avoidance. But to me, the biggest difference is precision flight, and in this case, I prefer the Mavic 2 Pro. The Mavic 2 Pro stops more precisely, handles better in tight spots, and it's like the difference between driving a full-size SUV with the EVO 2 Pro and a sports car with the Mavic 2 Pro. And maybe it's just because it's smaller and it has less flight time, but in my opinion, that lighter weight or something else makes it just a little bit easier to fly and a little bit more flyable. Now let's talk about portability. Both fold down into a more compact size than they are when they're unfolded flying. When unfolded, the EVO 2 Pro is 15.6 inches or 397 millimeters diagonal from motor to motor. And when unfolded, the Mavic 2 Pro is 13.9 inches or 354 millimeters diagonal from motor to motor. The EVO 2 Pro weighs 2.6 pounds or 1,191 grams, while the Mavic 2 Pro weighs 2 pounds exactly or 907 grams. Overall, with its smaller batteries, lighter weight, it's just easier to put this one into a backpack in terms of portability. Both are relatively quiet. The EVO 2 Pro is actually surprisingly quiet for its size, but the Mavic 2 Pro is slightly quieter. Both are portable and quiet, but for a drone I want to pack in a backpack and take along with me on a trip. Again, I prefer the Mavic 2 Pro. So the EVO 2 Pro retails for $1,795 for the standard kit, which includes one battery, a soft case, and everything you need to fly, and the controller, of course. $2,095 for the rugged bundle, which includes two batteries, a GPC hard case, and other accessories, and then $200 for each additional battery. So if you took the rugged bundle plus one more battery for a total of 3 batteries and no multi-charger, you'd be at $2,295. Now the Mavic 2 Pro retails for $1,599 for the standard kit, which includes one battery and everything you need to fly. $399 more gets you the Fly More combo, which includes 2 additional batteries, a multi-charger, a soft case, and some other accessories. So that's $1,998, basically $2,000, for 3 batteries, a multi-charger, the soft case. Now for $2,049, you can get the standard kit with the smart controller, which we'll talk about in just a second. And then if you were to add that standard kit and the smart controller to a Fly More combo, you'd end up spending $2,448, which is the most you can spend out of all these things I've just said. So the stock controller for the EVO 2 Pro has a color screen and is definitely a step up from the stock controller for the Mavic 2 Pro. But when you introduce the DJI Smart Controller to the mix, this is a big step up from both of these. You can see how much bigger the screen is. The screen is a lot brighter, and you don't need your phone to fly with this thing. I hate using my phone to fly with things. The DJI Smart Controller works with multiple drones in the DJI lineup. It works with the Mavic Air 2, the Mavic 2 Zoom, the Mavic 2 Pro, and the Mavic 2 Enterprise series, plus the Phantom 4 Pro V2. The Smart Controller is really amazing, and it's a big plus. It is an additional cost, but I really like it. But as far as the stock controllers that go with this thing, the EVO's controller does beat the stock controller from the Mavic 2 Pro. Now, the other thing that I have not ever played with, but I'm really curious about, is the Autel Live Deck. It is a box that can receive a live video transmission from the EVO 2 Pro and then can be used to distribute that video via live feed out to an entire team that's on the ground. So it's really just kind of a matter of how much you want to spend, because they stair-step each other. If you're getting the basic stuff, this is the better controller than this, but if you're upgrading to the smart controller, this is definitely the best one out of them. Not to mention that the original DJI goggles, which I don't think DJI sells anymore, still work with the Mavic 2 Pro, and then there's the Autel Live Deck. So there's lots and lots of stuff out there. This is a very subjective category, but if I was pressed, I'd probably say that if you're a new drone pilot, I'd give DJI a try for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Mavic 2 Pro is so popular that parts, batteries, etc. are going to be very easy to find. The batteries are actually a little bit cheaper too, and they're going to be around for a long time. And also, because it gives you 3 batteries and the multi-charger, I feel like the Mavic 2 Pro with the Fly More combo bundle is really the best bang for your buck. So let's get back to the original question. If you're looking at these, which one is better for you? Well, if you're a camera power user for both video and stills, you'll probably want the 6K capabilities of the EVO 2 Pro. And even if you're not, the ability to shoot 4K 60p with the EVO 2 Pro is huge. So for professional videographers and photographers, I would recommend looking at the EVO 2 Pro. But if you are more of a casual drone photographer or just getting started with your first drone, I'd recommend looking at the Mavic 2 Pro. To me, it flies better, it's more user-friendly, and it should meet the need of most amateur photographers and videographers, and even some professionals. And if you've ever owned a DJI drone before, you're probably already familiar with the software and how this thing flies, because there's a lot of commonality across those drones. And one more case where I prefer the Mavic 2 Pro is if you plan to travel with a drone. The smaller, lighter, and quieter Mavic 2 Pro is more of a travel friend than this guy is, even though this guy isn't bad. This one's just a little bit better. So I know this video is probably going to get a lot of comments, and I look forward to reading them. As I said in the beginning, both these drones are solid GPS camera drones. You really can't go wrong with either one, but there are places where each one is a little bit better than the other, and that's what I hope I was able to demonstrate to you. They're both going to be a good choice, but it really comes down to what you want to do with your drone. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Ready Set Drone. Thanks for watching.